Here's the second part of the colleagues installment. Hey, we left off last time. We're talking about I was talking about grading Regents exams at Jamaica High School. Don't read them, just mark them. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about marking Regents exams. I started marking Regents exams when I was at Newtown High School, which is a kind of an interesting thing because I had taught at Dominican Commercial High School and St. Mary's Boys High School before Newtown. Of course, students there took Regents exams like every place else. I didn't have to mark them because I didn't teach Regents classes. In those schools, if you taught a Regents class, you marked your students' Regents papers. When I get to Newtown, it's very different. It's marked Regents exams, and then in those days it was just the American History Regents, and it was marked by committee, and the committee was comprised of all the social studies teachers at Newtown. And there was a lot. There had to be 30, I would say at least, social studies teachers at Newtown. Remember, there was over 4,000 students. And in those days, this is now the late 1980s, the Regents exam had 3 essay questions that kids had to answer. There was a total of 7 essay questions on the exam. Part 1 of the essays, there was 2 questions about U.S. government. Kids had to answer 1 of those 2. And then the second part of the essay questions, there were 5 U.S. history questions, and the students had to answer 2 of those 5 for a total of 3 essays. Each essay was worth 15 points. The multiple choice was the other 55 points, and it was just a straight marking. How many points you got on the essays, added to the points you got on the multiple choice, that was your grade. That's going to change later on, as I'll mention. So I walk into the room where we're going to be marking the Regents exams. All the papers are up front. The multiple choice questions have already been graded. They ran through the department chairman, Al McMullen, had them run through a scanner. They've all been marked. So it's just the essays that need to be graded. And on the chalkboard in the front of the room, he listed the 7 questions, and then next to the question he put the names of the teachers who would be marking those particular questions. And he gave the more veteran teachers, especially those who had been teaching American history for a number of years, he assigned them the questions that he believed most of the students were going to answer, and you could pretty well predict which ones they would take. So he did that. So I was a new teacher at Newtown at the time, so I got one of the questions that he figured relatively few students would answer, and that's the way it was done in at Newtown in those days, and in many New York City high schools it was done the same way. So that's the way it was marked. Now I can remember first day marking exams, people were questioning, hey, this kid said this, should I give him credit for that? And then there'd be a discussion back and forth about whether that should be worth 2 points, he should get 3 points, he should get 1 point, he shouldn't get any points, and on it would go. And these discussions back and forth, and I've never experienced this before. I just assume this is the way it's going to go. And finally, a veteran teacher stands up and says, hey, we're not certifying people to do brain surgery here. We're just reading, a history essay to determine whether or not the kid knows enough history, American history, to get a high school diploma. So keep it in perspective, fellas, he says, and ladies. There were a few women on the staff as well. And if you have to ask whether or not this should get credit, you're not sure? Well, you've answered your own question. Give the kid credit. Always give the kid the benefit of the doubt. Give the kid credit, move on to the next one. And then he sits down. And that pretty much put an end to the back and forth about whether or not you should get credit. And that always stuck with me. This guy was right. You can't perseverate over this. If you're not sure whether or not it should get credit, maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't, give the kid the benefit of the doubt. So that always stayed with me. So when I moved on from Newtown to Townsend Harris High School, I became known as the scrubber. The scrubber was a person who, if a kid failed with a 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, you couldn't give a kid a grade between 60 and 64. That grade either had to be dropped below 60 or it had to be moved up to at least a 65. It was considered to be mean to fail a kid with a 62 on a Regents exam, because then they'd have to take the Regents exam over, because you had to pass the exam in those days in order to graduate. So any papers that were in that 60 to 64 range would pretty much be given to me to scrub up, find some more points in the kids' essays to bring them over 65. And I always was able to do that. You had 15 points for each. Throw on a point here, 2 points there, and boost the kid up to a 65, so the kid could pass. That was called uh, scrubbing essays. Now, we had one teacher on the staff. She was actually a substitute teacher. Her name was Sonia Nalvin. Wonderful woman, impressive woman. She was the chairperson of the social studies department at John Bound High School. She retired and she became a sub at Townsend Harris. And it was amazing to me. She knew every kid in the school. She knew their names, every kid in the school. I mean, I knew the kids that I taught, but I didn't know, every kid in the school. She seemed to know everybody. She was very impressive, very knowledgeable. You could see she was a very strong teacher and administrator. But when it came to marking Regents exams, and Lynn one June assigned her to help with marking the social studies Regents exams. In those days, we had two exams. You had a global and you had an American history exam. So it was a lot of work. So she assigned Sonia to help us. And it turns out that, you know, Sonia was the opposite of a scrubber. Sonia was a very strict grader, very narrow. She would always say, I know what the Regents are looking for with this question. And if a kid doesn't give me that, I'm not going to give them, very much credit, which is not right, because you can answer these questions in any number of ways. That's the way they were designed, to give the kid a lot of latitude in terms of what they could write. If a kid wrote something that was on topic and it was reasonable, you gave them credit. So I had to go back and pull all the exams that Sonia read, and I pretty much changed just about every grade that she gave, except for the ones where she gave the kids, most of the credit. And so I did, and so kids' grades went up, and that was the end of it. And then when I saw her in September, she comes over to me and she said, "Tony, I know what you did." And I got to tell you, I don't agree, but I understand. Okay, so we had a nice detente between Sonia and I, because I wouldn't want to alienate her, because she was just a very wonderful, wonderful person. But she knew she knew what I did. Now, when I moved to Jericho, I took that same attitude with me. Give the kid the benefit of the doubt anytime. And I said that over and over again, year after year, marking Regents exams, listening to the Jericho staff, debating, should I give a kid credit for this? Should I? And I always said, stop. If you have to ask the question, just give the kid credit. Give the kid the benefit of the doubt always. And then it's kind of a standard procedure. We'll all mark the same way. And at first, I was accused by some of being unethical in the way I was grading, but I was very happy that toward the end of my tenure there, the last couple of years, those that took the position that I was really being unethical all kind of came around. And one of them actually said in the midst of marking, you know, Tony had it right from the beginning. This is the way that exams should be graded. So that made me feel good. But one incident at Jericho will always stick with me. There was a special ed social studies teacher, Anne Marie Duran. Wonderful, wonderful woman, Anne Marie Duran. She worked tirelessly to help these kids with special needs pass the Regents exams in social studies, and she did an enormous amount of good for these kids. And I always have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for Anne Marie Duran because she was a graduate of the Mary Lewis Academy, which was in my neighborhood, an all girls Catholic school, where a lot of people who went to Mary Lewis Academy. I myself went to Mary Lewis Academy for 3 days in an exchange program in senior year, which was quite the experience to be one of four boys in a school with about a thousand girls. But in any event, I digress. So Anne Marie comes to me at the last day of Regents marking, and she says, "Tony, please look at this boy's paper." The kid's name was Sean. I forget his last name, but he's an autistic kid who was, functioning high enough that he could be in Jericho High School. He could be in regular classes with lots of support. And so that's one of the students that she was working with, Sean. And she said, "Please, Tony, find him some credit on his essays so he can pass. Because if he doesn't pass, his parents are going to make him go to summer school to take American history again, and then he's going to have to take the Regents again in August. And I know him well, and I can tell you he will not do any better in August than he has done right now. And he'll spend the whole summer in school. If, however," she said, "he passes, then he'll get to go to a summer program, kind of like a life skills type of program where he'll go to the beach, he'll go to amusement parks, he'll go to the zoo, they'll go shopping, they'll go to out to lunch at different restaurants, all, kind of learning these kinds of social skills and having these wonderful summertime experiences with other kids that are like him. And it'll be great for him. So if you could find him credit to pass, that would really be a wonderful thing." I was okay. Of course, Anne Marie, no problem. Let me have his paper. So I read his paper. In those days, it was 2 essays that you had to write, and they were graded on a 1 to 5 scale, and then it would go into a matrix, and then bingo bango, you'd come up with a score. How this matrix actually worked, I don't know, but he got ones on both of his essays, and in order to pass, he needed to have twos on his essays. 1 point, but it's not like 1 out of 15; it's 1 out of 5. So the difference between a 1 and a 2 is significant, and you could tell the difference right away when you read an essay that's a 1. It's just awful. There's like nothing there. A 2's got something at least. So I'm reading his essays, and I say, "Anne Marie, there's nothing here that he could get credit for. He wrote a paragraph, instead of an essay, and there's really nothing in there." And she just looked at me and said, "Tony, please, let this, he's such a nice boy. Let him have a nice summer." So, an ethical dilemma. What do you do? Because if I'm going to take a strict standard, no. What's going to happen to him shouldn't matter. It's what did he do on the paper. But, you know, I have feelings. I'm a human being. If the kid's not going to benefit from going to summer school, he's going to fail the Regents again. And what's the point? So I said, "Okay, Anne Marie, I'll make him twos, and he'll pass." And he did. And then had a great summer, I suppose. But the next spring, there was Sean in my economics class at Jericho, senior economics class. Him and another autistic kid. I forget his name. Let's call him Andrew. So it was Sean and Andrew, two autistic kids. Andrew was a little more high functioning than was Sean. But they were both in my senior economics class, along with regular general education students in the class. A total of about 28 students in the class. So one of the things I had my economics classes do is something I called economics in the news. I would do this several times a semester. They had to look at the New York Times that week, pick out any article that had anything at all to do with the economy. So it could be about products, it could be about services, it could be anything about money, anything. So it was like far afield. And the whole point was to kind of get kids to read the Times, do some current events, see how broad the economy really is, and things of that sort. So the kids would have to write a brief summary of the article and then a one-paragraph opinion about what they think about the article. All right. So, and then we would sit around the tables. I would call on kids. They talk about their articles, state their opinion, and then we'd have a discussion of the article. So I'm about to kind of randomly pick a kid to speak, and Sean shoots up his hand. Wow, Sean, okay. Tell us about your article, Sean. And so he does, and I really didn't know what in the world he was talking about. I said, well, what's your opinion about this, Sean? And he goes on for a minute or two, talking about his opinion. And in the class with him, sitting right behind him, is a special ed teacher that works with Sean and Andrew, and an aide that works with both of them. So they work through all these assignments with them and so forth. So they're sitting back there listening, and they're just like giving me like this. And so, okay, very good, Sean. And then you open up the floor for discussion. If you have any questions for Sean or you have any comments that you want to make. And so I'm sitting there with about 26, 27 Jericho seniors, and they just start to applaud, and not a friendly, warm round of applause, a rousing, yeah, Sean, terrific, and it was heartwarming, really. I mean, high school kids get such a bad rap, and it's ill-founded. I mean, they're so nice. These kids were absolutely wonderful. Sean was beaming. His teacher and the aide, they had big smiles on their faces. This was wonderful. And then Andrew raises his hand. Wow, this is terrific. Andrew, what would you like to add? Andrew says, I agree with Sean. Everybody starts clapping for Andrew. So Andrew was pretty sharp. He knew when to agree. So that was my kind of experience with Anne Marie Duran, her students, and kind of her approach to these special ed kids. Just really terrific. Now, let's continue on talking about grading. Back now at Townsend Harris, grading the American history Regents. This had to be in the middle of the mid 1990s. We were still in the old building at Townsend Harris, and we're sitting in the library, no air conditioning, got these fans blowing, and it was myself, John Hines, and a third teacher. Here's a photo of John Hines. So the three of us are marking the American history Regents, and then across from us at another table in the library, there are about, I don't know, a dozen or so English teachers getting ready to mark the English exam, and they're just kind of sitting around discussing. Well, if kid says this, they get 2 points. If it's that, they get 3 points, and they're having this kind of collegial discussion. And John and I sitting there, and this third teacher with these big stacks of papers, and we're trying to mark them. The fans are blowing. We've got to hold the papers down as we mark them so they don't blow away. Perspiration pouring down our faces. And of course, there's John Hines wearing a suit. Uh, John John was one of those veteran teachers that I worked with over the years that I just had a tremendous amount of respect for. Just really top notch people, and he was certainly one of those guys. So we're marking the papers, and we took the approach at Townsend Harris because there was only like 6 or 7 of us marking the papers. You couldn't do it like we did at Newtown, where everybody gets assigned a particular question, and you'd have 3 or 4 teachers marking the same question. It was just grab a paper and mark the 3 essays on that paper, and then go on to the next paper, and that's the way we're going to do it. So this third teacher, who shall remain nameless, not because I forgot him, I know exactly who it was, but I'm not going to say it, says, I can't mark like this. I'm not a generalist. Not a generalist. And he was saying that he wanted to go back the old way where he gets a particular question, that's the only question he marks. I'm not a generalist. And then he had to leave, he had to go proctor, so he walks out. So John and I are left with all these papers. And John says to me, he says, Tony, you know what the opposite of a generalist is? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, but a specialist? And he said, no, the opposite of a generalist is an asshole. That's okay. I can't, I can't, I can't disagree. I can't disagree with that, John. You're right. So we then, continued to hack our way through all these exams, and the third person eventually became a generalist like the rest of us. Uh, One other story about John Hines. John Hines was the senior coordinator. In those days, in the old building, you had the seniors took their classes on the Queens College campus, and you had a coordinator for the senior program who had an office on the campus. So we and I taught a couple of senior classes. This was my first year back at Townsend Harris after having been accessed. In any event, the first marking period, kids were just given a grade of satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And the Townsend Harris kids, every kid that I ever taught at Townsend Harris, that first marking period, they were all satisfactory. I mean, nobody was unsatisfactory. They were all satisfactory. So I would just go down the list. It was a scan form. You had to bubble in S or U, and I just bubbled in S for everybody. So a kid, senior, goes to John Hines and says, Mr. Hines, Mr. Scarnati gave me satisfactory for his class, and I'm not in his class. What should I do? And John just looks at the kid and says, don't do anything. Let's see what you get next marking period. We have to get an actual grade. So then John told me, Tony, you really should look at the names before you just bubble in the S. Okay, so that was John. Now, a side point, John was one of several colleagues that I had, who I also taught their child. John's daughter Eleanor was a student of mine, wonderful student of mine at Townsend Harris. Back at St. Mary's, my chairperson George Lamb, I taught his daughter Victoria at Dominican Commercial High School. Mark Sofer, who I'm going to talk about a little bit, I taught his daughter. I think her name was Vicky, also at Townsend Harris. Debbie Miklowitz, who I'm going to talk a little bit about in a few minutes. I taught her son at Townsend Harris, Michael, and he was also on my fencing team. Became quite the accomplished fencer. He was senior year, became the captain of the fencing team. He won a very prestigious award called the Iron Man Award as the top senior fencer in the city, and that was Michael, Debbie's son. And at Newtown, it was a teacher, Sandy Lopez, and she had 2 sons. She said one's going to Yale and the other's going to jail. She was a pretty funny character. So I taught her son, who she thought was going to Yale, Joseph, at Newtown. Now Sandy was divorced, single mom, and she told me one day that Joseph asked her, is Mr. Scarnati married? So that was a nice compliment from Joseph. I also taught, on this same vein. I also became colleagues with former students, which was kind of interesting. At Jericho High School, Tony Vitorino was a student of mine at Townsend Harris. He became a foreign language teacher at Jericho. And Maria Paniatu, I probably pronounced that wrong. It became a colleague. It was a student of mine at Townsend Harris. Became a colleague at Jericho. She was in the Jericho Middle School, and I was in the high school. And I think she taught math, although of that I'm not certain. And also another student of mine at Townsend Harris, Christine Brady, became a colleague of mine at Suffolk County Community College. So we had these kinds of connections. Now, if we go back, let's talk a little bit about Mark Sofer. Mark Sofer was a social studies teacher at Jericho High School, and Mark was eccentric, perhaps you'd say. I don't know. He was a nice guy, I thought, but he was very talkative. Very talkative. Talk your ear off, Mark Sofer. Which sometimes was good, sometimes not so good. It was not so good when he would see me in a hallway, and he always referred to me for some reason as Dr. Scarnati. And I'd hear him bellow out in the hallways, Dr. Scarnati, and he'd have his hand up, waving, and it meant he wanted to talk to me about something. And so he'd go on and on and on, and I remember one time he was going on and on and on, and I just kept walking, and he kept walking with me. I walked into the men's room. He came in right behind me, and he's still talking. I go into the stall, close the door. He's still talking. I said, Mark, please. And he finally left. But it was a good thing when I started teaching at Townsend Harris, my first year there. I was assigned 4 social studies classes and a health class. I had a license. Okay, I don't know. What am I? Health class. So I taught one period of health, and Mark was in the room the period before me. So I would come in, he'd still be in the room, and of course he'd start talking to me, and he'd go on for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I was fine. Keep going. Yeah, because it was making my 40-minute period of health a 30-minute period or a 35-minute period. So that was good. Mark used to refer to my former students that I had in freshman year, and he would get them in sophomore year. He referred to them as Scarnaticians. He had a little name for every other faculty member's students, and he said, Tony, I could always tell a Scarnatician because they know their stuff. Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. I appreciate that. So he was a kind of I don't know, a little bit eccentric. Some people really liked him. Some people really didn't care for him. But I didn't really mind him one way or the other. There's other stories I could tell about Mark, but I'm not going to, because we want to keep this light. Now, observations were always done by administrators, being observed by an administrator, and then you get a write up of the observational report and so forth. But at Townsend Harris in the late 90s, and this had to be citywide, they came up with this idea of intervisitations, interobservations between colleagues. So you could, if you wanted to, you could opt into this, where you would agree to observe one of your other colleagues, and then that colleague would then also observe you. And that would eliminate one of the department chairperson's observations. So I did that, and I did that with a couple of teachers. 2 in particular that I recall, actually 3 in particular that I recalled doing that. And I'll show you their photos now. So Judy and Debbie were in the same department as I was at Townsend Harris, the humanities department, but they taught English, and Myron was a social studies teacher in that department. And I tell you, there are other people I observed as well, but I'm not going to talk about the other ones. I'll talk about these three because these three were very, very good. And it always kind of surprised me when people would say, "Oh, this person, oh, well, he's a great teacher," or she's a terrific teacher. And I always thought, how would you know? I mean, we know them professionally as colleagues. We speak with them. We know what they're like personally. We know about what they have talked about, what they do in their classrooms, and so forth. But I think that unless you actually see them in action, you really you really don't know how good they are. Well, I can tell you this: Judy, Debbie, Myron, outstanding. I was so impressed when I observed each of those three. I found it remarkable. The three of them had one thing in common. They were very kind of even keeled uh, in terms of their approach to the class. The classes were very well managed. Uh, I remember Judy and Debbie were doing lessons having to do with whatever novel they were reading at the time, and the kids were unbelievably prepared. Had all post-it notes in their copies of the novels, and they could refer on page 86. And it was incredible. I was just sitting there, just amazed at how the discussion was unfolding and the level of the discussion, and Myron as well, in terms of the depth of his knowledge of history was remarkable, and how he brought that to the table was just incredible. I mean, I fool with Myron a lot about his classes, and but he was an outstanding teacher. In fact, he taught me two things that he emphasized, uh, that I actually implemented when I got to Jericho. He said, Tony, always make sure of two things. One, when you arrive in the morning, make sure you back your car into your spot in the parking lot. And two, always bring your coat with you to last period. This way, when the bell rings, you could get right out the door, and your car is ready to go. You don't have to back out of the spot. You could just pull right out, get on the Long Island Expressway, and get home quick. So I learned that. I learned that from Myron, along with many other things. I remember when I think it was Judy was observing me, because after you observe someone, they would have to observe you as well. So Judy was observing me in a class, and two things kind of happened during that observation. One, it was Teacher Appreciation Day or Teacher Appreciation Week, and the kids in the student council were going around giving teacher appreciation certificates, I guess, to everybody. Would get one, and they would state the reason on there why they appreciated you. And Judy was in charge of all that, because she was the COSA, the coordinator of student activities, and the student council would be one of them. So a kid knocks on my door, comes into my room, hands me the certificate of appreciation, and I read it out, and it says, this certificate is given to Mr. Scarnati because you never raised your voice in anger in any class. I thought that was very nice. Now, I never would have gotten a certificate like that at St. Mary's, where I raised my voice in anger at the boys many times, but not at Townsend Harris, because there was no real need. There was no real need to. So the lesson I was doing when Judy was observing me was the first of a few lessons on the Great Depression. And I always started that topic by doing a little economics lesson about the business cycle, and how a business cycle in a free market goes from a period of prosperity into recession, into a depression, and then back into a recovery, and the cycle repeats itself every 10 or 15 years in a free market. So in order to demonstrate how that works, I would always ask the kids to give me a product, any product, and I'll talk about how demand for that product is going to shift, and when the demand for that product shifts, the impact that it has on the broader economy. So I call on a girl, I forget who it was. I said, Name a product for me." And she gets all flustered. Oh, I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything. I said, what do you mean you can't think of anything? Any product. So she finally blurts out, shampoo. Shampoo? I said to her, I said, what? Are you deliberately trying to give me a product that I know nothing about? Is that what your thinking was on this? Shampoo. I said, you're the only student who's ever said shampoo. And so the class is laughing. It was very cute. But then, we use that as the as the example. So the observation, Judy got a laugh. I guess I got a positive review. I don't really know. So that was that. Now I did some observations where it was just awful, and that's why I stopped doing it. So I don't want to do this anymore, because it's one thing to see a great lesson, and that's terrific. But when you see something that's just awful, I didn't want to be in a position where I had to be critical in a negative way of a colleague. All right. Another colleague I'd like to talk a little bit about, good friend, Nancy Lee. Here's a picture of Nancy. Nancy Lee, I've mentioned before, she was the one that got me bounced out of Townsend Harris. She took my position. I got excess, went to August Martin where she taught, and then I was able to get back into Townsend Harris. And Nancy, of course, was there, and Nancy was terrific. We became very good friends. Nancy was and probably still is, a world traveler. She could teach global, and could just use her own photographs and slides that she had of the different places that she went to. She took a sabbatical one year, or one semester, I guess it was, and she went to Antarctica. I mean, so everywhere. Nancy. Uh, Nancy and I, in June, we would do Regents review before school started in the morning for the American history Regents. And kids would come into the review class, all different juniors, not just our own students. All different kids would come for the review session. And one girl, I forget her name, she came up after the review session, and she had a particular question. And Nancy said to the girl, "Oh, that's a good question, honey. I really can't answer that right now. But when you get to social studies class, ask your teacher to answer that question." And the girl looks at Nancy and says, "But Miss Lieb, you are my teacher." Nancy goes, "Oh, of course, of course, of course. I'll answer that question for you later." So, you know, oftentimes there would be issues where we would, maybe forget who our who our students were. But so Nancy handled that. Now Nancy and I, at least once, I think it was more than once, uh, played hooky together, and we went to Yankee games. At least once I can remember, we did that. I think it was twice, but there was at least once we took a day off, and we met at Yankee Stadium, and we took in a ball game. I don't know if it's when we were teaching at Townsend Harris. I kind of think I was at Jericho. She might have already been retired, but so I played hooky. Maybe Nancy didn't play hooky, but I did, and we went to a ball game. Uh, Nancy also went with me on one of our junior trips to Boston. I forget the year, and I might even mix up a couple of these stories. They all kind of blend together because I did a couple of Boston trips. But here's a picture of one of our Boston trips, and that was Nancy off to the side, in the far right. That was Nancy Lieb. So we go on a Boston trip, and one time I went on a Boston trip. The first time I went, we left after school on a Friday. You do it on a weekend, and drive to Boston on a Friday afternoon in May. The traffic was horrendous. It took us 5 or 6 hours to get to our hotel. We left around 3 or 3:30. We didn't get there until around 9, between 9 and 10 o'clock at night. It was a long ride because the traffic. up that I-95 corridor was just brutal. So the next year I went on the Boston trip, I noticed that the Yankees were scheduled to play the Red Sox that weekend at Fenway Park. So I said to Lynn, let's leave early. Let's leave at around 10 or 11 o'clock. We'll miss the traffic. We'll get to the hotel around 3 or 4. We can settle into the hotel. We can go out somewhere, to eat an early dinner, and then go over to the ball game. We'll get a block of tickets together and we'll go over to the game. She said, that sounds great, Tony, but Dr. Logman's not going to go for it. We have to stay in school the whole day. We can't leave early. So, well, let me speak to Dr. Logman. Maybe I can convince him. So I went to speak to him about it, and I said, it's not just going to a ball game. We're going to Fenway Park. And Fenway Park was built in 1912. It's the one of the oldest ballparks in America. The history around Fenway Park is it's like going to a national monument. This is we shouldn't miss this as part of a Boston trip. But in order to do it, of course we'd have to leave around 11 o'clock in the morning so we can get up there in plenty of time to get something to eat and then go over to the ball game. And he said, okay, beautiful. So we did. So we go. I don't know how many kids we had. A whole bunch of kids. Some kids didn't go. They stayed back at the hotel with one of the chaperones. But the rest of us went to Fenway Park with about 40 or 50 kids. We had a block of seats. It was fun. Yankees lost. So what are you gonna do? But I remember a couple things at the game. One, I'm sitting, with a group of kids, and a vendor comes around selling peanuts. Hey, get your peanuts here. And the girl next to me raises her hand. Oh, I'd like some peanuts. So the guy comes over, ready to toss a bag of peanuts at her, and she says, "Oh, what kind do you have?" And the guy stopped dead in his tracks. What are you talking about? What kind do I have? He says, "Yeah, you have like honey roasted peanuts, or you have this." The guy says, like, sweetheart, I just got regular peanuts. Says, oh, okay, I'll take a bag. And then another, Kim Finneran, I remembered her name. Kim Finneran was on that trip, and she ran down to like behind the Yankee dugout, and she was taking pictures. And she comes running back, and she says, I just flashed Derek Jeter. What are you talking about? What do you mean you flashed Derek Jeter? I'm thinking, my God, what do you mean you flashed him? She says, with my camera. I took a picture and the flash went off. I flashed Derek Jeter. Okay, very good, Kim. So she was a wonderful, wonderful kid. Side point about Kim, she tried out for the JV basketball team and I cut her. It was one of the worst decisions I ever made, because it turned out that Kim was a wonderful baker, and she would bake all sorts of cookies, cakes, and cupcakes and all sorts of stuff. And I cut her from the team. We could have been eating good with Kim on the team. But back at the hotel, where the chaperones, Nancy was one of the chaperones. I was a chaperone. A couple of other people, and each of us were assigned a group of hotel rooms that we had to make sure that the kids got into the room at night when we whatever time we assigned, 10 o'clock, whatever it was, you had to be in your room, and then you had to make sure that the kids that you were assigned were downstairs for breakfast at whatever time we set for breakfast, because then Lynn had this itinerary that was actually jam packed, and we were just gone for the whole day after breakfast. So you had to make sure everybody was got up out of bed, was downstairs. So I'm checking in the my hotel rooms, and I knock on the door, and it was 4 girls in the room. Girl opens up the door, and she's dressed like I wouldn't expect them to dress like this in their hotel rooms. It was kind of scanty, let's say. And she says, "Oh, hi, Mr. Scarnati." I said, "Hi. I have to check to make sure all 4 of you are in the room." And she said, "Oh, well, please come on in." So I walk into the room, and one of the girls is in the bathroom. I said, "Well, I have to wait because I got to actually see her that she's here." So as I'm waiting, I look over by the windows, and I notice on the floor there are 4 pairs of sneakers. Curious. Underneath the drapes, they're sticking out from underneath the drapes. So I go over to the drapes and I pull the sash, open up the drapes, and there's these four boys standing there trying not to be seen. I said, fellas, get to your room. They were one of mine because I had all the boys' rooms, but there weren't enough boys just to do boys. I had some girls' rooms as well, and so they went scampering back, to their rooms. The other girl came out of the bathroom. I said, "Okay, girls, no more boys in the room," and I left. The next morning, uh, everybody check everybody in. They're all down at breakfast. Okay, that's great. But Nancy noticed that two of her students were missing. So she went up to the hotel room to see what's going on. So she goes into the room, and sure enough, there are the two, a boy and a girl, in bed together. Oh. So Nancy had to handle that, and I'm sure she handled it very, very well. But you never know what to expect when you go into the hotel rooms. All right, the last colleague I'll talk about at Townsend Harris is Eileen Marcus. Here's a photo of Eileen. Eileen, uh, two things. One, on a take your daughter to work day, I took my two girls with me, Amanda and Stephanie. Stephanie was about, I'd guess around 6 or 7. Amanda is the older of the two, and Amanda was with one of her friends who I also brought with me. And so they were kind of roaming around the building, and they ditched Stephanie. So Stephanie was kind of lost, and they were in the new building now. She's kind of lost, and Eileen Marcus sees her in the hallway, I guess, and called, "Who's your daddy?" And so she said, "Mr. Scarnati." Okay, so she takes two students from the room to take Stephanie, to Mr. Scarnati's room. So that was very nice. She rescued my Steffi from wherever she was roaming around. I don't know. Uh, and the other story about Eileen Marcus goes back to the first day that I met her. Uh, Dr. Larbin wanted to see, there was a group of us who were new to the school, and he wanted to see us, so we were waiting outside his office. And she asked me, a little banter. You married? Yeah. You have kids? Yeah, I got 3 kids. Oh, you have a picture of your children? And I said yes, and I showed her pictures like this. And Eileen says, "Oh, you have beautiful children. You must have a very attractive wife." Okay. I guess there are different ways you could take that, but I always use that story when I would teach sociology. In sociology, there's a theory that says, it's called the matching hypothesis, that marriage partners, that you select a marriage partner. When you select a marriage partner, it's someone who is equally attractive as you are. And here's a picture of my bride. And so that's Maureen. And so I interpreted what Eileen said to be a violation of the matching hypothesis. Like, my kids are so beautiful, I must have a very attractive wife because this couldn't produce that. And I would use that in sociology class. The kids would all laugh. It was a pretty funny story. So years later, I saw Eileen, and I mentioned to her that incident, and she gets kind of angry. "Oh no, that's not what I meant. I meant that you're very attractive, so your wife must be very attractive to produce such beautiful children. I would never say something like that about you." I just started laughing. I said, "Eileen, I'm sorry, I misunderstood, but I'm going to keep telling that story because it gets nice laughs in class." So that's a kind of a look at colleagues over the years. I'll be back next time I think I'm going to do a look at sports. next time. So have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.